Let's move on to breaking up the price effect, equivalent variation in income. As mentioned above, price effect can be split up into substitution and income effects through an alternative method of equivalent variation in income. The reduction in price of a commodity increases consumer satisfaction as it enables him to reach a higher indifference curve. Now, the same increase in satisfaction can be achieved through bringing about an increase in the income. Okay, prices remaining constant. Now, you can bring this satisfaction, increase in satisfaction by increasing his income. Okay, while you keep the prices constant, the increase in income of the consumer, prices of goods remaining the same, so as to enable him to move to a higher subsequent indifference curve, at which he is in fact at which he in fact reaches with reduction in price of a good, is called equivalent variation in income, because it represents the variation in income that is equivalent in terms of gain and satisfaction to a reduction in price of a good. You'll understand better once we read into the diagram. Thus, in this equivalent income variation method, substitution effect is shown along the subsequent indifference curve rather than the original one. How this price effect is decomposed into income effect and substitution effect through equivalent variation in income is shown in 8.44. When price of good X falls, the consumer can purchase more of both the goods. Okay, so when the price of good X falls, the consumer now has more income in his hand, and which is why he can purchase more of both the goods. It means that after the fall in price of X, if the consumer buys the same quantities of goods as before, then some amount of money will be left over. So if with the amount of income that you have in your hand and the price of one of the goods, let's say X, is decreased, and if you buy the same amount of quantities that you did before, you will have extra amount of money in your hands. Is that right? In other words, a fall in price of good X will release some amount of money. Money thus released can be spent on purchasing more of both the goods, and so you can use that money to purchase more of both the goods. It therefore follows that a change in price of the good produces an income effect. Okay, so this change in price of the good produces the income effect, because you have more income in your hand. When the power to purchase goods rises due to the income effect of the price change, the consumer has to decide how this increase in purchasing power is to be spread over the two goods he is buying. Now, if you can buy more of both the goods, you need to decide what spread you want to make. So how much of both of the goods do you want to buy more? Okay, how he will spread the release purchasing power of the two goods depends upon the nature of his income consumption curve, which in turn is determined by the preferences about the two goods. Okay, now this is going to depend on his ICC, income consumption curve. From above, it follows that as a result of increase in his purchasing power or real income due to the fall in price, the consumer will move to a higher indifference curve and become better off than before. Okay, because his purchasing power is increasing, the consumer will move to a higher indifference curve, right, and will become better off than he was before. He can now buy more of both the goods, right? As a result of fall in price of X, the consumer can therefore be imagined to be moving up to a higher indifference curve, right? He can now move on to a higher indifference curve than he did before. Along the income consumption curve, as if his money income had been increased. Right, so income consumption curve was when you increased the income or decreased it. So it was basically the locus of all the points where your satisfaction was increasing due to a change in your income. Okay, increasing or decreasing, I mean, it just moves up, slopes up, right? So it can be imagined as he's moving to a higher indifference curve, like his money income had been increased. Okay, whereas the price of goods X and Y remained unchanged. Thus, a given change in price can be thought of as equivalent to an appropriate change in income. So what you basically can say through this is that the change in price the change in price of a good actually looks like a change in income now. So it will be seen from 8.44 that with the price line PL1, this is a price line that we have before PL1, okay, this one, okay. The consumer is in equilibrium at point Q. Let's assume that he's in equilibrium at this point on IC1, okay. Suppose the price of good X falls, price of Y and his money income remaining unaltered, so that now the budget line is PL2, okay. Now the budget line is PL2 because you can buy more of good X because the price of good X has fallen down. So you basically draw a budget line like this, okay, holding P still, okay. With budget line PL2, he's in equilibrium at R on indifference curve IC2, so now he can move on to R on indifference curve IC2. Now a line AB is drawn parallel to PL1. Now you draw a line AB which is parallel to PL1, okay. So this is going to keep the price ratio constant because the slope of both of these lines is going to be the same, so that it touches the indifference curve IC2 at S. And now this IC2, which is basically a higher satisfaction curve than he was when he was at point Q, you move to this one at S, okay. It is going to this parallel line is basically touching this point S, okay. It means that the increase in real income or purchasing power of the consumer as a result of the fall in price X is equal to PA in terms of Y or L1B in terms of X. So this is the increase. This is the equivalent variation, okay. This increase. Movement of the consumer from Q on indifference curve IC1 to S on higher indifference curve IC2 along the income consumption curve is a result of income effect of the price change. And now this is actually the income effect, this, because a higher income is basically leaving you to this IC2 on a point S when you hold the price ratio constant. But the consumer will not be finally at equilibrium at S. This is because now that X is relatively cheaper than Y, he will substitute X, which has become relatively cheaper, for good Y, which has become relatively dearer. It will be gainful for the consumer to do so, but it also needs to be kept in mind that he is actually going to buy more of X because it's cheaper now. Thus, the consumer will move along IC2 from S to R. He's going to move from S to R. This movement from S to R has taken place because of the change in relative price alone, and therefore, but this is actually just because of the relative price, right? Because the income is constant along the new curve AB, but on PL2 where R lies, actually it's the price effect, okay. Hence is a substitution effect. So this is called substitution effect. Thus the consumer will move along the IC2 from S to R. This movement from S to R has taken place because of the change in relative price alone, and therefore represents substitution effect. Thus the price effect can be broken up into income and substitution effects. Price effect is Mn as a whole. Price effect is Mn as a whole. Income effect is Mh, okay, because keeping the price level constant, you move on to a higher IC where the income is more. So this is the income effect. For substitution effect is Hn. The entirety of it is price effect, okay. Let's read into the price demand relationship where we derive the law of demand. Indifference curve analysis, with its technique of looking upon the price effect as a combination of income effect and substitution effect, explains the relationship between price and quantity demanded in a better and more analytical way. A distinct advantage of viewing the price effect as a sum of income and substitution effect is that though it is the nature of response of quantity purchased to a change in price of a good, can be better and easily explained through the nature of response of quantity purchase. So the amount of quantity that you're purchasing of a good because of the change in price of that good can be better explained in this way of decomposition between income and substitution effect. In case of most of the goods, the income effect and substitution effect work in the same direction, but in some cases they may pull in different directions. The direction of substitution effect is quite certain. We always know that it's going to be a negative effect. So a fall in relative price of a good always leads to an increase in the quantity demanded. In other words, substitution effect always induces the consumer to buy more of a cheaper good, but the direction of income effect is not so certain. With a rise in income, the individual will generally buy more of a good, but with rise in income, the individual will buy less of a good if it happens to be an inferior good for him, since he will use better or superior substitutes in place of the inferior good. Again, this is something that we've read into already. Thus, the income effect may be either positive or negative. For normal goods, the income effect is positive. Therefore, when the price of the normal good falls, the result is an increase in the purchasing power. Income effect will act in the same direction as a substitution effect. That is, both will work towards increasing the quantity demanded of the good whose price has fallen. For the inferior good, in which case income effect becomes a negative, income effect of the price change will work in opposite direction to the substitution effect. The net effect of price change will depend upon which one is greater, right? So if the minus is greater, then you will have to go with that. If the plus is greater, then you will have to go with that. To sum up, price effect is composed into income effect and substitution effect, and further that the direction in which quantity demanded will change as a result of change in price will depend upon the direction and strength of the income effect on the one hand, and strength of substitution effect on the other hand. Price demand relationship for normal goods, let's look at it in a graphical form. In order to understand the way in which price demand relationship is established in indifference curve analysis, consider 8.43 given the price of two goods and his income represented by the budget line PL1. Okay, so we are at PL1 initially. The consumer will be in equilibrium at point Q, okay, at this point on the indifference curve IC1. Let us suppose that price of X falls. Okay, let's assume that price of X falls, so we are now going to go to PL2. Price of fine is money income remaining unchanged, so the budget line now shifts to PL2. The consumer will now be in equilibrium at a point on the new budget line PL2 if the equilibrium position on PL2 lies on the right of Q, such as at R. Okay, such as at R. It will mean that the consumer buys more of both quantities, more quantity of X than Q. Okay, so he's buying more of X. Okay, it will mean that the consumer buys more quantity of X than at Q. Now it can be proved that in case of normal goods, the equilibrium point on budget line PL2 will lie on the right of Q. Okay, meaning thereby that the quantity demanded of the good X will rise as its price falls. Okay, there will be a rise in the price of rise in the quantity demanded of good X as price falls. As seen above, the direction and magnitude of the change in quantity demanded as a result of fall in price of the good depends upon the direction and the strength of the indifference curve on one hand and substitution effect on the other. As for normal goods, the income effect is positive and will work towards increasing the quantity demanded of X when its price falls. The substitution effect, which is always negative and operates as to raise the quantity demanded of the good if its price falls, and reduces the quantity demanded of the good if its price rises. Okay, so it's a negative effect. Substitution effect is always going to be a negative effect, which is the same in this case. Thus, in case of normal goods, both the income effect in positive and negative substitution effect work in the same direction and cause increase in quantity purchased of good X whose price has fallen, with the result that the new equilibrium point will lie to the right. So in case of normal goods, the new equilibrium will always be at the right. Okay, substitution effect causes MK. Has to be MH. Okay. increase in quantity demanded. Income effect, which is positive here, also leads to an increase in the quantity demanded by Kn. Okay, they want us to look here. Pretty similar diagrams, still the same explanation, but let's just see what it finally comes down to. Income effect, which is positive here, also leads to an increase in quantity demanded by Kn. Each effect therefore reinforces each other. So what we're saying is that in this case each effect is just reinforcing each other, making it so it's just going to be, the both of them are saying that it's going to lead to a higher quantity demanded, so they are reinforcing each other. As a result, the total effect of the fall in price of X from the level indicated by PL1 to the level indicated by PL2 is the rise in quantity demanded of good X from OM to ON. That is, the quantity demand increases by Mn, which is equal to Mk plus Kn. Already seen this. So Mk is a substitution effect, Kn is a income effect, and the actual increase is the Mn. Okay. To sum up, the income effect and substitution effect in case of normal goods work in the same direction and will lead to the increase in quantity demanded of the good whose price has fallen. In other words, quantity purchased of a normal good will vary inversely with the price of, in its case, income effect is positive. Okay, so quantity purchased of a normal good will vary inversely with its price, as in its case income effect is positive. So if you if there is an increase in the price, you will have a decrease in the quantity demanded, but in this case we had a decrease in price, so it's basically inverse proportionality. For an inferior good, in case of inferior goods, the income effect will work in the opposite direction to the substitution effect. When price of an inferior good falls, its negative income effect will tend to reduce the quantity purchased, while the substitution effect will tend to increase the quantity purchased. So substitution effect always is going to say the same thing, that if there is an increase in income, decrease the quantity purchased. If there is a decrease in income, increase it. This is not going to change. But for income effect, because we know for inferior goods what happens is that as you become richer and richer, you want to decrease the amount of inferior good that you purchase and substitute it for superior goods. But normally it happens that negative income effect of the change in price is not large enough to outweigh the substitution effect. Okay, this is what we talked about in this somewhere here, that it will depend on the strength of both of them as to what finally happens. The quantity purchased increases or decreases is going to depend on the strength of the substitution or the income effect. This is so because the consumer spends a very small proportion of his income on a single commodity, and when price of a commodity falls, a very little income is released. Okay, in other words, income effect, even when negative, is generally too weak to outweigh the substitution effect. It follows therefore that as a result of fall in price of a good, substitution effect will always induce the consumer to buy more of the good whose price has fallen, and will usually outweigh the negative income effect. Understandable. Thus, even most cases of inferior goods, a net result of the fall in price will be an increase in quantity demanded, even if it's going to be a less than expected quantity demanded increase. Okay, we'll see in this case. It is as clear that the majority of inferior good quantity demand of the good will vary inversely with the price, and Marshallian law of demand will hold good. The price demand relationship in case of inferior goods having weaker income effect is illustrated in 8.45. It will be seen that the fall in price of good X makes the consumer shift equilibrium from Q to R. Okay, this must have been his initial BL. This is the new one. You move from Q to R. Okay, as a result, quantity purchased of good X increases from OM to OT. You purchase from OM to now you purchase OT, okay, but the income effect is negative and is equal to HT. If income effect alone was working, it would have caused the consumer to buy HT less of good X. Okay. Again, it's intuitive from whatever theory that we read here. Income effect is actually HT. Okay, so if income effect was actually what we read was that if income effect was the only thing that was uh, coming off, you would have bought HT less. Okay, but substitution effect is universally present and always induces the consumer to buy more of a relatively cheaper good. Substitution effect is equal to MH and is greater than the income effect HT. Therefore, the net effect is an increase in quantity demanded by MT. So you, because of substitution effect, you move from M to H. Because of income effect, you came back from H to T, and now all what you have left is MT. Okay. Hence, we can conclude in case of inferior goods, quantity demanded varies inversely with price when negative income effect is weaker than the substitution effect. In other words, even in case of inferior goods having weaker income effect, the demand curve will slope downward. So, Marshallian demand curve is going to hold good. Now, talking about the Giffen goods or Giffen paradox, there is a third possibility, that is there may be some inferior goods for which the negative income effect is strong or large enough to outweigh the substitution effect. Till now, in case of inferior goods, the income effect was not as big to outweigh substitution effect, but in cases of such goods, which is Giffen goods, this might be true. In this case, quantity purchased of the good will fall as its prices fall, and quantity purchased of the good will rise as the price rises. In other words, in this case, quantity purchased or demanded will vary directly with price. Now, the income effect can be substantial only when the consumer is spending a very large proportion of his income on the goods in question, so that when price of the good falls, a good amount of income is released. This is the problem that we had with inferior goods, that the amount was not big enough, so the income that was being released was not big enough. If the good happens to be an inferior good, the income effect will be negative as well as strong and may outweigh the substitution effect, so that with fall in price, the consumer will buy less of that good. Such an inferior good, in which case the consumer reduces consumption when its price falls and increases consumption at the price rises, is called the Giffen good. A rise in price of bread caused such a large decline in the purchasing power of the poor people that they were forced to cut down the consumption of meat and other more expensive goods, blah blah blah. All of this is already read into when we read about Giffen goods in the first place. Okay, the price demand relationship in case of Giffen goods is illustrated in 8.46. With a certain given price income situation depicted by budget line PL1, again we are on PL1. The consumer is initially at equilibrium in point Q on the IC1. With a fall in price of the good, the consumer now shifts to a point R on the IC2. With fall in price, as a result, the shift on budget line from PL1 to PL2, the consumer reduces his consumption of X from OM to ON. Because of the decrease in price, for Giffen goods case, there is also a decrease in consumption or decrease in quantity demanded or purchased. So now the IC should be drawn in such a manner that the quantity which was purchased of X before should be greater than the one purchased now. This is a net effect of negative income, which here is equal to HN. Okay, HN is the income effect, because again you draw this curve AB, keep a point X which is in line with AB, also is on the same IC curve, so as to keep the income constant, the price constant, vary the income, so that you would now move to HN. Okay, HN is the income effect, same thing, which induces the consumer to buy less of good X, and the substitution effect, which is equal to mh, but you see the substitution effect, which is mh, which is caused by the fall in price of x, which induces the consumer to buy more of the good. Since the negative income effect Hn is greater than the substitution effect Mh, the net effect is a fall in quantity purchased. So if you come back to the initial quantity of X that you were purchasing, which was on point Q, which is M, and now you see all of this, the coming back of the quantity demanded due to the income effect, and the increase in quantity demanded because of the substitution effect, the net effect actually comes out to be this Mn or Nm, which is essentially the reduce in quantity demanded. Therefore, if the demand curve showing price relationship with given good is drawn, it slopes upward. Thus, the quantity demanded for given good varies with price. For a good to be a given good, the good must be inferior with large negative income effect. The substitution effect must be small. Proportional income spent on inferior good must be very large, because only in that case the income that is released, the income, the extra income that you have in a hand because of the fall in price of a particular good, is large enough so that you can now not want to consume that good and go on to superior goods. 3. Demand theorem based on indifference curve analysis. The indifference curve analysis enables us to derive a more general law of demand in the following composite form, consisting of 3 demand theorems to which the Marshallian law of demand constitutes a special case. The quantity demanded of a good varies inversely with price when the income effect is positive or nil. Okay, so if the price is going up, the quantity demanded is going to fall, income effect is positive or nil. The quantity demanded for good varies inversely with price when the income effect for a good is negative but weaker than the substitution effect, as in case of inferior goods. The quantity demanded for good varies directly with price when the income effect is good of a good is negative, and this negative income effect is larger than the substitution effect. So the given goods case. In case A and B, Marshallian law of demand holds, and we get a downward sloping demand curve. In case A applies to normal goods, the case A applies to normal goods in which income effect and substitution effect work in the same direction. Case B applies to inferior goods which are not given goods, and the third case applies to given goods of positively sloping demand curve. Marshallian law of demand does not hold true in the third case, which is demand is inversely price is inversely related to quantity demanded. Marshall mentioned a given good case as an exemption to the law of demand. Thus, the indifference curve analysis is superior to Marshallian analysis as it yields a more general law of demand which covers the given good, because Marshall just said that this is an exception, but indifference curve analysis actually goes on to explain this. If you remember, in cardinal utility chapter we had read this as one of the limitations of the Marshallian analysis or the cardinal utility analysis. The explanation for occurrence of given good is that in case of negative income effect outweighs the substitution effect. Since Marshall ignored the income effect of the change in price, again one of the limitations of the Marshallian analysis is that he did not consider the income effect at all. But now in indifference curve analysis we include the income effect, so we are able to explain this. However, it may be pointed out that it's very hard to satisfy the above mentioned 3 conditions for the occurrence of given good, namely the consumer must be spending a very large proportion of income on the inferior good. Therefore, although given goods case is theoretically possible, the chance of its occurrence in the actual world is actually negligible. So the 3 occurrences or the 3 conditions that we put here about the given goods case, it might not actually hold true in real life, okay, because what they are saying is that a very large proportion of income has to be spent on inferior goods. This is because consumption of the people is generally diversified, so the people spend a small proportion of their income on a single commodity, with the result that pre-induced income effect, even when negative, is generally small and cannot therefore outweigh the substitution effect. As mentioned earlier, Marshall believed that quantity demanded could vary directly with price. As mentioned above, Sir Robert Giffen is said to have actually observed this phenomenon. But there is a controversy about the interpretation of the so-called Giffen good. From our analysis, it is clear that Giffen good's case can occur in theory. As explained above, when negative income effect that the fall in price of an inferior good is larger than substitution effect, we get a positively sloping demand curve for Giffen goods. So theoretically, it's possible, but since income effect of the change in price of a single commodity in the real world is too small, the assumption that we took is that for a Giffen goods case to be to happen, or for the income effect to be the largely negative, or the negative income effect to be large enough, we have to have enough money to be released. So he has to be spending a lot of money on the Giffen good, but in actual world it might not be practical to assume. It might not actually happen. Derivation of individual demand curve from indifference curve analysis. Finally, what we're doing is deriving the demand curve. Price consumption curve traces the effect of the change in price of the quantity demanded of a good, but price consumption curve does not directly relate price with quantity demanded. In indifference curve diagram, price is not explicitly shown on the y-axis. On the other hand, demand curve directly relates price with quantity demanded. So what demand curve we know is price versus the quantity demanded. Price being shown on the y-axis, quantity demanded on the x-axis. A demand curve shows how much quantity of a good will be purchased or demanded at various prices. Assuming that tastes and preferences of a consumer, his income, price of all goods remain constant. This demand curve, showing explicit relationship between price and quantity demanded, can be derived from the price consumption curve of indifference curve analysis. In Marshallian utility analysis, demand curve was derived in the assumption that utility was cardinally measurable and marginal utility of money remained constant with the change in price of goods. In the indifference curve analysis, demand curve is derived without making these dubious assumptions that you can quantify utility, etc., etc. Let us suppose that consumer has got 300 rupees to spend. In figure 8.47, money is measured on the y-axis. Okay, money is measured here. So you've got 300 at first to spend. While the quantity of good X, whose demand curve is to be derived, is measured on the y-axis. Okay, quantity of good X. An indifference map of the consumer is drawn along with various budget lines showing different prices of good X. Okay, and various ICs are shown with varying prices of good X. PL1 shows that price of good X is 15 per unit. Okay. PL1 shows price is 15 per unit. As price of good X falls from 15 to 10, the budget line shifts to PL2. You know that if the price is going to fall, you will have a budget line which is now further towards the right. Similarly, PL4 is drawn. Okay. The various budget lines obtained are shown in column 2 of the table 8.3. Of course, you can see the quantity demanded here as well. Tangency points between the various budget lines and indifference curves, which when joined together by a line constitute the price consumption curve, shows the amount of good X purchased or demanded by various prices. So PCC is drawn, which basically is the locus of all ICs when price is varied. With the budget line PL1, the consumer is in equilibrium at point Q1. Okay. On the PCC, at which the budget line PL1 is tangent to the ICC. In this equilibrium position at Q1, the consumer is buying OA units of good X. In other words, it means that the consumer demands OA units of good X at price 15. So when price is 15, he is buying OA. When price falls to 10, his budget line shifts to PL2. The consumer will be in equilibrium at point O Q2. Okay, Q2 of the price consumption curve, where the budget line PL2 is tangential to the IC2. At Q2, the consumer is buying OB units. It is thus clear from the price consumption curve that we are getting information. We are required to draw the budget line showing directly the amounts demanded of good X against various prices. Okay, so quantity demanded can be derived from here itself. Okay. Against prices. Yeah. With the above information, we draw up the demand schedule in table 8.3 given above. The above demand schedule, which has been derived from the indifference curve diagram, can be easily converted to a demand curve with prices shown on the y-axis. So this is the 15 at A quantity demanded. The price is 15, which we saw just now. Then it was 10. Then it was I think 7.5, yes, and then 6. Okay, 10, 7.5, 6, and then the corresponding quantity is demanded. So basically from the PCC you can draw into the quantity and the price at which each of them is assumed to be. It is easier to understand the derivation of demand curve if it is drawn rightly below the indifference curve diagram. This has been done in figure 8.47. In the diagram at the bottom, where on the x-axis the quantity demanded is shown as an indifference curve diagrams in the top panel, but on y-axis in the diagram in the bottom panel, price per unit of the good X is shown instead of total money, right? That's what the demand curve essentially is. In order to obtain the demand curve, various points K, L, S, T representing demand schedule of the above table are plotted. By joining these points, we get the required demand curve DD. In most cases, the demand curve of individuals will slope downwards to the right because as the price of the good falls, both the substitution effect and the income effect pull together in increasing the quantity demanded for the good. We've already seen this. Even when the income effect is negative, the demand curve will slope downward to the right if the substitution effect is strong enough. Again, we've seen this already. Only when the negative income effect is powerful enough, which is in the given goods case, the substitution effect, can the demand curve slope upwards towards the right instead of sloping down to the left, which we will derive now. So as explained in the previous section, demand curve slopes downward because of two factors, namely income effect and substitution effect. Both income effect and substitution effect usually work together, increasing the quantity demand of the good when its price falls and makes the demand curve slope downward. But in case of given goods, the demand curve slopes upward from left to right. This is because in case of given goods, income effect, which is negative and works in opposite direction to the substitution effect, outweighs the substitution effect. This results in the fall in quantity demanded of the given good when the price rises. So the rise in price causes the quantity demanded of the good to fall as well, and therefore fall in quantity demanded is caused when the price is falling. Therefore, demand curve of the given good slopes upward because there is a positive relationship. Rise in prices, rise in quantity demanded. In figure 8.48, the indifference curves of the given goods are drawn along the various budget lines showing various prices of the good. Price consumption curve of the given goods slopes backwards. You see, it's going to slope backwards because we just saw a while ago that all these ICs are actually going to be drawn in this way. Okay, you're going to reduce the quantities. Okay, as the price of that good falls. So we'll have a backward bending PCC. In order to simplify the discussion in the figure, we have avoided the numerical values of the price and instead used symbols such as P1, P2, P4 or levels of good x. It is evident from 8.48, the upper portion, that the PL1 or price 1 with the budget line PL1, the consumer is in equilibrium at point Q1, this one, okay, at P1, this one, okay. This is the map basically. Uh, this is pretty intuitive because we've already done this one and we've derived this already. For the lower part, the demand curve of the given good slopes upward to the right, indicating the quantity demanded varies directly with the change in price. With the rise in price, quantity demanded increases. With the fall, quantity demanded decreases. Okay. To sum up, in most cases, that is in case of normal goods, the demand curve of the individuals will slope downwards to the right because of the price in good falls. Both substitution and income effect pull together in increasing the quantity demanded of the good. To sum up is basically just a summation. We've already underlined all the important points, but just in case you want to finally rewind all of this, it boils down to in this paragraph. Even in case of inferior goods for which the income effect is negative, the demand curve will slope downward to the right if the substitution effect is strong enough to overwhelm the negative income effect. Only in case of given goods for which the negative income effect is powerful enough to outweigh the substitution effect, demand curve will slope outward to the right instead of sloping down to the left. I hope this chapter's explanation reading into was helpful because it's an increasingly important chapter. A lot of questions can show up from this. Uh, Please read into it again. Check all the pointers that we've highlighted most importantly. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful one.